Are you working with Azure Purview or Apache Atlas and trying to create custom lineage between two or more entities? In this video, we are going to use Microsoft Excel and the Python package PyApacheAtlas to create our lineage between entities with very little code that you need to write. We'll start off with a brief overview of how lineage works. Then we're going to create the Microsoft Excel template in which we'll use PyApacheAtlas and to extract information from this template. Then we're going to actually fill in that template and create a custom lineage between one input and one output. But the same principles will apply between many inputs and many outputs, or many inputs and one output, etc. And then we'll also demonstrate how we can overwrite lineage as well. If you want to learn more, there's some documentation here down at Dana Smackdown, as well as on the official GitHub repo for PyApacheAtlas. In brief, lineage works in Purview or Atlas through a process entity. So you will have things like an Azure SQL table, a Hive table, a data set, and those are table level things, right? They are themselves an entity that you want to keep track of and metadata you want to keep track of. A process entity is a special type in which it has two additional attributes, an inputs and an outputs attribute. These two attributes allow us to connect an array of data sets to an array of output data sets. And so I might have one input data set that leads to 100 output data sets, or I might have 50 input data sets that lead to one output data set. And I'm using the word data set here very explicitly because that is the actual type that it needs to work with, the underlying super type. So if you have something like a Azure SQL table, you're good. It's an input or an output data set, right? Because the Azure SQL table itself is a subtype of the dataset type. However, let's say you were going to work with an Azure SQL Server. For some reason, you wanted to represent a Azure SQL Server as an input to a process. That doesn't work because the Azure SQL Server itself is a Azure resource type. Its parent type is an Azure resource. And so, since it doesn't satisfy that dataset subtype or supertype situation, we cannot use that kind of resource. So only things that are a subtype or a multi-layered subtype of the dataset type will work inside of this standard normal flow for lineage within Azure Purview or Apache Atlas. So how do we create the template? First, we need to get back into VS Code and we need to actually run this command after we've installed PyApacheAtlas, as well as any of the other toolings. There's another video on that for you if you'd like to check it out. Feel free to view that video first and then come back. So I'm using VS Code in order to do this, and I've already installed PyApacheAtlas. So I'm just going to run the command python -m PyApacheAtlas --make-template, and I will specify the location that I want to create this Excel file. There we are. And great, I've created the template. Now let's go into the template and actually view what this looks like. So let's actually see what this lineage with inputs and outputs might look like through the Excel template. I've gone to the Update Lineage tab inside of the Excel template, and it provides me the required fields by default. So let's walk through these. First, we have the target type and the target qualified name. So these are the unique attributes that are necessary to identify a data set. In this case, we'll need to provide the type. And so again, it's got to be a data set or a subtype of data set. Then we'll provide the qualified name. And in Atlas and in Purview, you can grab the qualified name from the user interface, or hopefully you can also programmatically generate this, right? So for example, if you're looking at an Azure SQL table, it usually follows the pattern of MS SQL : / the server name / the database name / the schema / the table. And then that repeats for the source as well. So we have the target, so these are the outputs, and the source are the inputs. Then we come into something that's actually, you get to be a little more freeform. So the process name is like the friendly name of the particular process that we want to create. So for example, if you were going to represent a stored procedure, you might call this the name of the stored procedure itself. This would be, SP_ABC123 perhaps. In addition, you would have to specify a qualified name. And so again, a qualified name is a unique representation within Azure Purview or ApacheAtlas. And I would encourage you to follow the same flow of any standards, such as with MS SQL. There are other standards that Azure Purview implements, as well as that is available in ApacheAtlas. So if you're going to extend them, take a look to see what that kind of pattern looks like. And finally, we need to provide a type name. By default, I think you might start off with a process type. And so the process type is built into ApacheAtlas and Azure Purview, and it's just ready and available. However, it doesn't look great in terms of, it doesn't say that this is a SQL stored procedure process. This isn't a custom data source process, let's say. But for this demonstration, we're going to stick with process. But of course, anytime that you create a custom entity and a custom process type specifically, you would be able to plug that in here instead. And so then that would allow you to specify additional attributes and things like that. Or again, it would look and appear as if it is some sort of specific data source or data tool type if you wanted it to be. But that's what we're going to start with. So let's look at some of our inputs and outputs first, and then we'll come back to the Excel spreadsheet. I created in advance 2 data sets, one that is an input and one that is going to be an output. And in this case, it's very bare bones. We can, of course, get more advanced if we wanted to. And so I'm just going to go ahead and click into one of them just to prove that it doesn't have any lineage information. And so there's no lineage information here. Coming back to the search results, I will go ahead and just start grabbing some information out of here. So first off, I have, this is our target. It's the output, qualified name. And then I know the type because it says dataset right here. Now, Purview does this in where it makes a kind of a friendly name. So if you see a space in there, it might not actually be a space. It might be an underscore. In this case, dataset is actually one word. So you will need to know a little bit more about the type system to actually understand, what is this particular type officially under the hood for the ApacheAtlas API. So great, I have my target type and I've got my target qualified name. I'll do the same thing for source. There, so I have my demo output 01 as my qualified name for my target and my demo input 01 as my qualified name for the source. Just the information that I grabbed from the Purview portal in this case. Now I get to be more freeform. I can create this as whatever I want. So my process name, I'll just call this my custom process. And the process qualified name, I need to create this as something unique, right? So a common-ish convention is to use something like the concatenation of the target and the source qualified names. So again, those are unique. So I might do something like this. So in my case, I just concatenated demo output 01 and demo input 01, but you would probably want to be more specific, more exact as to what that would entail, because again, it has to be unique, and maybe those tails of your qualified names are too generic. With that, I'm going to save this file, and then we're going to go back into VS Code and actually run the commands to actually push this into Purview. Back into VS Code, we now have a little demo script that's also available on GitHub that will allow you to quickly read this particular tab on this Excel spreadsheet and then push that information into Azure Purview. So what are we doing here? Very briefly, we're importing the JSON library so that we can manipulate the response from the Atlas API. I'm going to use the Azure CLI credential. I've installed the Azure CLI and I've authenticated already to Azure using the command line interface, and that's just really convenient. Otherwise, you could have used the service principal, or if you're in ApacheAtlas, you could have used the basic auth available as well. And that's again in the install and authorization video that's already available, or in the documentation. Then I have to connect to a client. I have to use either the Atlas client or Purview client. In this case, I'll be using Purview. I then essentially am starting to authorize or authenticate against this service, and then creating the client. I have to specify in Purview case, just the name of the service, because the service itself is always going to be unique in Azure. And then I provide my credential here. Next, I'm actually going to import a couple things. I'm going to import an Excel configuration as well as an Excel reader. This Excel configuration just says, hey, take the default options, right? Since I did not customize my template, which you are available to, I'm just going to create the defaults. Next, I have to pass that configuration into the reader itself to say, hey, this is how you should read this particular Excel file. These are all the configuration variables you might need. Excellent. So now I have this reader, and I'm going to run the parse update lineage command. And so you'll notice that this follows the same pattern as the Excel spreadsheet. We're working on the update lineage tab. I just have to pass it in the file path name, and then it will store all the results in the processes list. And then I will pass that into a upload entities, and that should just take it from there. It'll just run it into Azure Purview or PyApacheAtlas, and then we will see a response there. So let's take a look. Great, that ran successfully. I can tell because I have a create statement here that says I created a process with my qualified name, and there's the GUID if I want to go check it out. Awesome, and there's it repeats the GUID based on what the PyApacheAtlas had originally assigned it. So excellent. So let's go to Purview and take a look at our lineage. I'm in the input01 detail page. I'm going to click into lineage, and there we go. There's my custom process. I have an input01 going into my custom process, and I have an output01 going into coming out of my custom process. Great. Now that we've created our first lineage, how might we overwrite this? How might we change this a little bit further? And so we can update our lineage as well. Back in our Excel file, if I want to create, perhaps I have additional attributes that I want to append to this particular process. The downside of PyApacheAtlas is that this is not an append operation. This is an overwrite operation. So if I were to specify a target, then whatever I specify is going to land there. And if I have existing targets, then it will end up overwriting those targets or those outputs. Same thing for source. So there is, unfortunately, PyApacheAtlas is again really about just bulk upsert from an Excel perspective. Programmatically, we can do a lot more. We can absolutely just append individual entities to the lineage. But again, that's programmatic. So if we're focusing on the Excel side of the house, let's say I wanted to add in an additional source, perhaps, to this. So let's do this. I will add in another source, and we will do an update. For full transparency, I just created a second input variable that I wanted to now start using. So let's say you had that created from a scan or something like that, or you had created that in addition through the bulk entities tab, but now I have input 01, input 02, and output 01. And currently my custom process is still looking at only input and output 01, and I want to add input 02. Let's take a look how that will look in the spreadsheet. So back in the spreadsheet, I have, again, since this is an override method, I need to specify everything. And again, there's programmatic ways we can get around this, but from an Excel perspective, it's an override. I specify my target one time, my demo output 01, and then I specify my sources, each again one time. I don't need to repeat this because this is already being assigned as a target. And Purview/Atlas doesn't really relate that, hey, this process is taking this as a source and this as an output, and then this one has another source or as another input and ties directly to a specific output. If you want to do something like that, you would create separate processes. So that's why we only specify this one time. You can absolutely specify multiple times, but you'll receive a warning in PyApacheAtlas. No less, the same sort of deal. I've created the data set, or I'm specifying the data set. I'm specifying its demo input 02, my custom process, demo input 01, and this, etc. process, all the same. Now my qualified name doesn't really make as much sense, but no less, I need to specify this information to be the same, because otherwise, especially for qualified name, if I specify a different qualified name, it's a different process entity. And so as a result, this guy would go somewhere else. We don't want that. We want the override. So I'm going to save this and bring us back to VS Code, and we're going to go see what happens. All right, back in VS Code, let's run this command and go ahead and see what happens. Great, we have now an update, right? And the same process, demo output 01, demo input 01. Again, bad qualified name, but excellent. We have a last modified timestamp of 2, meaning we have done an update. Great, let's go take a look at that particular process entity and see the lineage now. I'm back on the lineage tab, and this time focusing on the my custom process, and I can see now that I have input 01, input 02, and output 01. Great, this is awesome. So I have, again, overwritten. I didn't necessarily make an append, I have just overwritten it. So really quickly, we could also reverse this by rerunning that script without input 02, and we would get back input 01 at that point. So there is that's one technical downside of it, But again, if you're going to be in more advanced use cases, then there are programmatic ways of doing that. And I'll have links in the description below for how you might accomplish that. And that's it, a quick glimpse into doing custom lineage with Excel and PyApacheAtlas for Azure Purview and Apache Atlas. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, please go to the GitHub page for PyApacheAtlas and leave your feedback and issues there. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and how you use PyApacheAtlas in the field.